this as simply a one-off, and that we read off everything that happens in the narrow lens of pandemic, in the narrow lens of emergency, we might miss out on the underlying conditions which will allow us not simply to prepare better for other emergencies, to address this one better, but also to reconstruct different social and economic relations, bring to the fore different political agency that might help create a better society that can face some of these things better in the future, or even avoid some of these things. Because as I will hope to touch upon in my very few minutes, I think that the mode of production in Africa itself, a continent which focuses on natural resource exploitation as its main role, as its main contribution to the global economy, it makes us particularly vulnerable to pandemics, to epidemics like this. We all know that the COVID, quickly just to make that point, we all know that there's basically a crisis of transmission between animal life and human life for a variety of conditions. People have talked about a lab in Wuhan. More likely than not, they've talked about the wet market in Wuhan and so on and so forth. But clearly, for those who've studied the question more closely, it is the idea of industrial farming, industrial animal farming in particular, the kind of mass production of in the agrarian food chain of meat, of poultry, and so on and so forth, is one of the elements which actually has brought this crossover of virus from animal populations into human populations. But the issue is the transition. And for us in Africa, even if we are not at the center of industrial farming and industrial animal farming, although there is increasing evidence of manifestations of that. So for example, if you take the European Union, one of the things about one of the effects of the economic partnership agreement, the free trade agreement between the European Union and the African countries and regions, has been to destroy, not simply to destroy local poultry, for example, but to ensure that the local poultry production increasingly has become a hub, a part of the supply chain of European poultry multinationals. So the same mechanisms that they use, the same material, the same beds, the same chemicals, the same production conditions, they seek to import these here and establish those here under cheaper labor, lower environmental regulations, and so on and so forth. So we can have that problem as well. But if we cast our mind to the broader question of natural resource exploitation, then the question of the decimation of our natural resources, including, for example, deforestation, which brings animal life closer to human habitats where that previous contact did not exist, is one of the key transmission mechanisms for the kind of virus that we've seen. This was the case in Ebola, okay? So that in West Africa, for example, the deforestation that's taking place across tropical Africa, a certain bat population moved to West Africa, and between them and the local population, or between them and other intermediary animals, you got this in the local population, and you had this crisis. And when we think about deforestation being one of the key vectors, one of the key transmission mechanisms, one of the key ecological shifts, the environmental shifts, which actually brings about this, which makes this transmission even more likely, I think Africa is one of in the forefront of that. Last year, when we saw this wide, spread fires in the Amazon, in terms of in Brazil, in Bolivia, and so on, what was underreported at the time was that similar levels of destruction was taking place in places like Angola, all the way across DRC and so on. But outside the regime of catastrophes such as fires, you have on a regular basis, as part of our export drive, that type of deforestation taking place. In 2018, 2019, for example, 3 out of the top 5 countries in terms of the rate of increase of deforestation globally came from Africa. Number 1 was Ghana, the country where I'm speaking from right now. Number 2 was Cote d'Ivoire, which is the country next door. Number 3 was Cameroon, just down the road, or down the Gulf of Guinea, so to speak. And that is alongside the fact that in terms of quantity and in terms of quantum, countries like DRC, as I mentioned, are well ahead in the lead already. So if we add that to the totality of natural resource exploitation that we're talking about, the pollution of rivers and so on, then we have this real crisis. Of course, the virus itself, in this case, manifests itself essentially as a respiratory disease. And we know that, again, the question of respiratory diseases has climbed up the health concerns in Africa precisely because of the fact that, the type of urbanization that we have, the same environmental conditions that we talk about, the same model of natural resource exploitation, and also the lower regulatory standards means that a lot of people are facing conditions that they didn't used to face before. I'll give you one example. It is true we are an exporter of oil. Africa is a big exporter of oil. One of the big commodities that it depends on is oil. And that is one of the reasons why this thing is going to hit us very hard, because of the crash in oil prices. It started before the COVID became global, but of course it's been accelerated as a result. But just to take aside from that, we also know that in as much as that production and export of oil creates all kinds of vulnerabilities, including what I just mentioned, financial, economic, and so on, and the environmental vulnerabilities, there are also blowback. so that the imports that imported energy products that we bring back onto the continent, for example, diesel, petroleum, and so on and so forth, imported by global monopolies such as the British company, Trafigura, they have levels of, of pollutants in them, which are sold only to the African market. In the case of Trafigura, for example, it has been found that what they are able to sell in places like Africa sometimes can contain pollutants between 4,000 and 5,000 times the level that they'll be allowed to supply and sell a similar product in Britain, for example. So the respiratory things that we're talking about, as well as the race to the bottom, the scramble for, let's say, natural fuels and so on, charcoal burning and so on, those kind of respiratory conditions, in the slum conditions, in the poverty conditions, in the mass degradation, environmental degradation, those are realities, part of the underlying conditions that we must go. So that in going forward, both in terms of the economics and the ecology of primary resource dependence, that is one of the things that we ought to address, and that we need a different economic model, a different revolutionary, radical green model, which benefits not transnational companies, which does not allow them to monopolize in terms of markets, in terms of technology, and so on and so forth, in terms of capturing the capital gains, but one that actually involves linkages and diversification and transformation of production capacities of working people within Africa itself, and organizations that can retain the benefits of that within the continent itself. Because when we look at this question and we extend it a little further, what we find is that the kind of monopolies that are present in the natural resource export sector are beginning to multiply across the economies. I've said that one of the effects would be the economic crisis. The IMF, for example, says that Africa will go into recession, a growth rate of minus 1.5%, which will be the first recession that the continent as a whole has faced since the 1990s, more than 25, 30 years. In some countries, more than 30 years, we've not faced this kind of condition. When you take the kind of things, the responses that the global financial system has had, one is the capital flight. There has been massive capital flight for those bonds.
If you can just please try and wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah.
The bondholders who hold African debt, there has been massive capital flight from those who have actually extracted money from our remittance payments, from our money transfer payments, from the mobile services and the mobile financial services and so on and so forth. And that same platform economy is precisely the fact that you can roll out a monopolistic platform that allows you to aggregate even from low margins. You can aggregate across a whole volume of people, and a whole volume of people whose conditions of life are being pressed down in terms of the returns of their labor because of the weight of the informal sector in the economies and so on and so forth. Since I'm out of time, let me just end on this one final point. When we look at it in those terms, it is easy to say that it is a question of Africa's one more manifestation of Africa's oppression within the world. That big countries can control the way in which there's the financial resources and the terms of the financial resolution of this crisis, that they can seize the market in terms of masks and PPEs and reagents for testing and so on and so forth, and that therefore it's a north-south thing and we ought to construct a new nationalist consensus to address this. I think that would be a bit short-sighted. I think that would be premature. It would be a bit short-sighted, because within what would have existed as a nationalist consensus are domestic interests which are profiting heavily, both economically and politically, from this crisis. There are domestic interests who are on the side of the kind of solutions that the global system so for example, if we look at the terms that the IMF is imposing in a country like Ghana, the local elites are very much in favor of many of those dimensions as well. So in looking at the responses from below, the popular responses not simply of the slum dwellers who are the ultimate victims of lockdown, but former working people, that whole spectrum of working people, including especially women who bear the brunt of the social reproduction crisis that this reflects as well, who are bearing the brunt of caring for people without pay, who are bearing the brunt of domestic violence within lockdown and so on. If we construct a social alliance around the comprehensive needs of such a constituency, we can construct a unifying social model of economic agenda, of political demands, and the ways in which we begin to organize to overcome some of these things. And I think that in the discussion, hopefully we can pick up, for example, what are some of the models that are being promoted in Ghana from the ruling class, from the IMF and so on, and look at how that impacts directly, as well as the responses that we can build from below. I think that it's time that we look beyond coming back to business as usual, restoring growth and stabilizing the situation. We should seek more radical and more transformative methods than that. Thank you.
Yeah, Jesse, thanks for that. Just a quick thing. To raise hands, you go to your participants thing, and then the icons appear on the right, and you can queue for the question time by just raising hands, and then that will be in addition to the chat box. Okay, Jechi, thank you for that overview. We'll now invite Femi to make his intervention.
Hey, thanks very much. I'm happy to be here. Let me also say that by way of introduction, I am also interim deputy chair of the Alliance for Surviving COVID-19 and Beyond, ASCAP, or your state chapter. That is a new organization we have just formed to mobilize ordinary Nigerian people to put pressure on government to provide palliatives. Now, let me give some background facts on COVID-19 in Nigeria. The index case was confirmed on 27th February this year. And as at today, over 22,000 samples have been tested. Confirmed cases, 3,145. Active cases, as at today, 2,508. Discharged cases, 534. Deaths, 103 persons have died, were satisfied to have died as a result of contracting COVID-19. However, let me say that these figures may not actually be reliable, because in one of Nigerian newspapers today, Daily Trust, it was reported that on 2 days alone, 1st and 2nd of May, more than 100 graveyards were found in a local government in Yobe State, Fortescue. So, and we are having official figure of the number of persons who have died to be 103, whereas the newspaper is reporting that in one local government alone, more than 100 persons died and were buried within 2 days. The situation is perhaps worse in another state, in Kano State. The key measure adopted by the state is the copy and paste lockdown, by which movement is restricted. The lockdown was first announced on the 30th of March for 2 weeks, and it was extended on the 13th of April for another 2 weeks. Then the lockdown was eased. The easing of the lockdown was declared on the 4th of May until further notice. What characterizes the easing down of lockdown is that movement is allowed within each state of the 36 states of Nigeria, but interstate travels are prohibited. The question therefore to ask is, why is it that government had to concede to ease the lockdown? The basic answer is that there was resistance. Resistance in terms of community protests, particularly in Sapele, Lagos, and some places in Abuja, and of course, outcry in the media, including social and traditional media, to the extent that the resistance was to the extent that as at 23rd of April, 25 persons were shot dead by security agencies in the course of enforcing the lockdown. And the key demand of the ordinary people is, we love to stay back at home, but provide palliatives. Give us water, give us food. No palliatives, no lockdown. But government appears to be saying that we want to protect you against contracting COVID-19. But the people were answering government, are telling government that yes, we don't want to contract COVID-19, but we also want to live. If you must keep us at home, then provide us means of sustenance. To show that rights are interconnected. The right not to contract disease does not preclude the right to live. So during the period, communities suffered menace of armed robbery. Youths, unemployed youths, who had no means of livelihood, considered themselves into a menace. Ordinary people, with the little they had, they also had to be given these youths food and money so as not to be attacked. So there was widespread cry of hunger. Truly, government tried to distribute some palliatives, but it was grossly inadequate. And in many cases, rotten rice was distributed. Another means by which ordinary people are being harassed is the use of face masks. They are now saying that people should face mask or face prosecution. And by this, merely providing opportunity for police harassment and extortion. Then people are also kept in isolation centers. But the isolation centers are best described as death camps, as concentration camps. About hundreds of beds are packed in a room without even maintaining the policy of social distancing. They are not being fed. They are not being treated to the extent that in Gombe State, one of the states of Nigeria, the patients came out, they trooped to the streets protesting against the way they were being treated. But we must note that the rich people are not taken to the isolation centers. 4 governors were tested positive for COVID-19. They stayed in their various homes. They were never taken to the isolation centers. Another method they adopted is to arrest the homeless in the streets, the Almajiris in particular. Almajiri is an Hausa word referring to children who left their parents in search of what to eat on the basis that their parents could not provide for them. So they were arrested and distributed back to their states of origin. Now, it is important to also note that the ruling class in Nigeria are using COVID-19 as an opportunity to pass wealth, societal wealth, into the hands of the rich. I have tracked the various funds that they have mobilized. They have mobilized $2.09 trillion. $2.09 trillion. And they are not meant to build hospitals. The funds are not meant to provide PPEs, personal protective equipment. They are not meant to buy or produce test kits. They are not meant to produce face masks. They are not meant to supply water. They are not meant to build houses for the homeless. They are not meant to pay salaries. They are not meant to establish unemployment, insurance or social security schemes, but they are meant just for big business in the name of revamping the economy. There are several other measures that they have adopted. But what I want to also point out is that whereas the state allows the big business to access wealth under the name of COVID-19, what they promise the working class is hardship, job losses. We're already witnessing that, and threats of job losses. The unions in the oil and gas industry, for example, are already raising concerns that they will fight if they are sacked. In Access Bank, one of the banks in Nigeria, the managing director already said that they will cut jobs.
Can you please try and wrap up? Please try and wrap up.
Okay, thanks very much. So, in rounding up, I will say that the ruling class in Nigeria are making laws to give relief to big business, but they are not making laws to provide relief, to guarantee jobs, to guarantee salaries being paid during this period. So facing the future, COVID-19 should actually provide an opportunity for us to rethink governance, for us to evolve a more equitable way of distribution of wealth, and to ensure that socio-economic rights to food, to basic needs are guaranteed facing the future. As I say it, we are entering perhaps into an era of unprecedented economic crisis, but also an era of unprecedented struggle by the working class to protect jobs, to protect their livelihoods, and if possible, to change society. Along with the working class, the new organization we have formed, the Alliance for Surviving COVID-19 and Beyond, will stand with the Nigerian masses. We have already promised to take up the institution of lawsuits to challenge the killing of 25 persons. And we have also set up structures to defend the rights of people being violated in the process. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Femi, for your presentation on Nigeria. We'll move south now. We'll ask Heike Becker from South Africa to give us her intervention on this. What we've heard from Jechi and Femi have given us some things on both the overall situation and also the very specific situation in Nigeria, which contains some of the details that we see in many of the countries around the continent. No doubt by the time we're finished, we'll have a fairly rounded composite picture. Heike, please take the floor.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Like many others, I have recently reread Camus' 1947 novel, The Plague. I was struck by the complete absence of the Arabs of Iran in this novel, the city in colonial Algeria where the novel is set. They're invisible, overlooked, not counted. Now, why am I starting to talk about COVID-19 in South Africa? By talking about colonial Algeria. Surely in today's South Africa, Africans are counted. Or are they? A week ago, the South African political economist and analyst Stephen Friedman raised concern that during this crisis, politicians in South Africa see the masses as problems to be controlled rather than as citizens to work with. And that seems to be very much a problem here. The COVID-19 lockdown points out that there are two South Africas. In one of them, people are well equipped to obey the rules, and in the other, they are not. It's not that the government wouldn't know that. In late April, the president announced a 500 billion rand relief package to extend social grants, to the extent of announcing that for the next 6 months, a monthly payout of 350 rand would be given to anyone who's not already receiving a social grant. So there's even some kind of temporary basic income grant that has been granted at this moment. So South Africa's impoverished majority have certainly been visible. They've been standing in kilometers long lines, waiting for food parcels. We've seen images also of desperately hungry people looting warehouses, supermarkets, etc. Yet certainly Friedman was right when he said that those in politics and government have no idea how most people in this country live. In Camus' novel, The Epidemic reveals the hidden truth of a corrupt world. In 2020, South Africa, the coronavirus once more revealed the country's chronic illness, inequality. The country is infamous for being the world's most unequal society. South Africa's richest 3,500 people own more wealth than the most impoverished 32 million together. The first cases of COVID-19 were brought into the country by members of the globally mobile middle and upper classes. But when internal transmission started, those most at risk were certainly the poorest and the most marginalized. The first day of lockdown, 27 March, amplified the divisions very strongly. For those with money and jobs, well-stocked pantries and freezers, the day may have been occasion to be grateful for the government's decisive action. At the same time, videos circulated from the streets of some of South Africa's townships that showed crowds being out there trying to frantically doing some last-minute shopping. Some angry social media voices came up, and some of them came, in fact, from seasoned activists saying, what the fuck is happening in some of the ghettos? On some reflection, of course, it became clear that you survive hand to mouth, and with inadequate access to water, the protocols of social distancing and hygiene are hard to follow. People in the poorest communities thus far have mostly been bravely patient. For many have lost their income, especially those who make a living day by day, like the domestic workers, the waste pickers, and many others. There's much hunger. Relief measures are there, but often they do not work. And permit-happy bureaucrats have sometimes made it hard for food relief to reach hungry people. Now, the whole background for that, of course, is that in South Africa, the government took decisive action from the 15th of March. At that time, there were 85 confirmed cases in the country. A state of disaster was declared with firm restrictions that were put into place. Borders were closed, schools were closed, universities suspended their academic programs. A week later, a full lockdown began. For 5 weeks, South Africans were only allowed to leave the house to do shopping for groceries or medicine, visit the doctor, or collect social grants. Since the 1st of May, there has been some easing, primarily in the field, indeed, of a limited return to work in the economy. A few personal restrictions have been eased. Still no travel is allowed between provinces except in very specified circumstances. Alcohol and tobacco sales are still banned. Outside exercise is now allowed, but only between 6 and 9 a.m. in the morning. In fact, one could even think that South Africa may have had the world's strictest lockdown at all. The government's swift and science-based approach initially created very much a sense of we are in this together. Most people, as I said, have been complying with severe regulations that were there. And even hardcore critics of the government, like activists, have often been offering cooperation and support. So there's been a lot of support, in fact, for the lockdown that was imposed by the government. However, from the start, there was also concern about the possible authoritarian and militarized clampdown. Coercive policing, humiliation, and violence have targeted almost exclusively the urban impoverished population. Some cases were taken to court, such as that of a resident of Alexandra Township who died after being beaten by soldiers when having found to have had a drink inside his own yard. In fact, it was alleged that in the first week of the lockdown, more people died at the hands of the security forces than from the virus the lockdown was supposed to present. There have also been much concern about evictions that continued. At times, it seemed that the security forces were more interested in flattening the shacks of South Africa's poorest and most vulnerable communities than to flatten the curve of the virus spread. And then there have been problematically quarantine camps for refugees and the homeless, particularly here in my city in Cape Town, where the city set up 27 kilometers outside the metropole, a tented camp to quarantine 4,000 homeless people, and that at the time when the very cold and wet Cape winter just set in. Now, I'm an academic teacher, and as such, I have been constantly checking in with my students. My students have been feeling incredibly confused, struggling mentally and emotionally. They've also been worried about the hurried move of teaching onto online platforms. Now that they are off campus, students, certainly at the predominantly Black working class university where I teach, lack access to the internet because they cannot afford the excessive prices for data charged by South African mobile network companies. Universities have provided some relief. However, this was certainly not enough, and it does not resolve at all the profound problems of many of the students who have been confined to overcrowded homes. Now, what I'm trying to point out here is we're seeing here again the conundrum that is South Africa 26 years after the end of apartheid. The government has rolled out massive initiatives in community-based screening and testing, and as I mentioned already, in food relief and the extension of social grants. Often, however, this is patronizing and controlling. The government's 500 billion rand social relief package certainly puts South Africa among the most generous relief providing governments worldwide. However, this was accompanied by the deployment of an additional 70,000 plus soldiers to enforce the lockdown. It is not that South Africa is turning somehow into a securitized police state. The issue is those in power see the masses in the country as problems to be controlled. Yet on the other hand, there has also been hope, particularly from within civil society and activists. Under the slogan, social solidarity is key, South African civil society has really shown itself to be, has risen marvelously to the occasion, so to speak. Activists and communities have been mobilizing and organizing for support of the most vulnerable. In Cape Town, a city that is really notorious for its racial and class divides, dozens of community action networks have been organized in local neighborhoods and have connected poor and middle class areas across the city. Community initiatives provide all kinds of practical support, soup kitchens, and so on. On a more political level, Czech dwellers associations have called for an end to evictions under the lockdown. Currently, there's also a campaign for possibly organizing a rent strike going on. Perhaps the most impressive, a broad people's coalition called the C19 People's Coalition with more than 250 organizations has been built during this crisis that is running campaigns for social solidarity under the banner, stay home, stay safe, demand a just response to COVID-19. The program of action includes income security for all under the lockdown. Practically, C19 led the successful campaign for the extension of social grants. Colleagues, for instance, from my university's Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, who are also very much involved in that campaign, have focused on food security. And with all this, the focus has been on grassroots organization and mobilization, including also the identification of strategies to divert violence. And especially we've been talking here about domestic violence, which has been a real problem. There have been one or two instances.
Just try and wrap up.
Yes, okay. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Thank you. There have been one or two instances of militant protest. For the most part, the lockdown is isolation from the normality of collective life. So the challenges have been to find effective new forms of organizing and mobilizing. Organizing through social media, I think, has been found can only do so much. These have been really enormously weird times. And yet it seems that particularly through this rise of activism and mutual support, we have also seen hope that perhaps we may come out of this and we may be able as a society to imagine a better future where people are coming together as united subjects. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Tafazwa, can you please pick up the conversation?
Hello, am I there?
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. First, I just want to thank everyone, to thank those who have organized the meeting, who have managed to host it. My name is Tafazwa Choto. I'm from the International Socialist Organization of Zimbabwe. The ISO is part of the International Socialist Dependence. I'll just be brief, updating on what has been happening in Zim. We are now in our 5th week of the lockdown, which has been implemented to avoid the further spread of the COVID-19 virus. So far, Zimbabwe has got 34 people who have tested positive and 4 deaths. Most people, including myself, we fear that the numbers are not correct, even though there's been a low infection rate in Zim, but there hasn't been massive testing. And as at end of April, we had just slightly above 8,000 instead of the targeted 30,000. And now we have gone for a week, for 7 days, without recording any new cases. We're still at 34. At one time, the number was increased to 40, and then later on, it was brought back to 34, saying they'd been retesting, and later on, the samples tested negative. So that's our main worry, that there is no massive testing that is taking place. And if it remains like that, we might see a disaster if the coronavirus is there and it will spread around. On Monday, when the government, on Friday, when the government announced that we are now moving to level 2, the government then asked the companies, factories, etc., to do testing for their staff members who are now going back to work. There was an outcry from business, and the government has now said that the testing should be done within 14 days. The move could be correct to make the bosses pay to contribute to the testing, but this should not just be left in the hands of the private sector. The government should have taken, should have kept on testing people, and should have asked the business sector to pay the expenses. So that is a major worry that we've got now. And just to say that the COVID virus, the coronavirus, exposed the fundamental flaws of the capitalist neoliberal policies that the government of Zimbabwe has adopted, that is of neglecting the public hospitals, and they were caught unaware and unable to deal with the virus. All along, the elites in Zimbabwe, both from the government, from the ruling party ZANU-PF, the elites from the opposition MDC, and business elites were used to fly out of the country to South Africa and Western countries for treatment, and neglecting the health sector. But now the borders have been closed, and they are now trying to run around. And we actually hear of rumors of elite hospitals that are being fully equipped to treat the elite in the business and also in the political sectors. The health sector remains ill-equipped. The health workers who are on the forefront do not have adequate personal protective equipment. And as I'm speaking right now, the health workers from Chitungwiza, from Chitungwiza Hospital, are actually on strike, demanding better wages, demanding protective equipment, and also demanding insurance for their families, since they'll be on the forefront. At the same time, with this crisis, we have seen the elite, especially from the ruling ZANU-PF, we have benefited from the neoliberal economic policies, coming on the forefront to make donations, now wanting to appear as if they're caring, they're caring for the ordinary people, yet their donations are nothing compared to what they've stolen so far. As I said, we are now in our 5th week of the lockdown. Since the lockdown was announced, it started on the 30th of March. There have been long winding queues of ordinary people queuing for basic commodities like meal, sugar, cooking oil. Those basic commodities have suddenly disappeared from the shops, from the shelves in the shops, with the capitalists hoarding these basic commodities so that they push up the prices. So even if they are talking about lockdown, people are still roaming around, trying to get this basic, running wherever they hear that the meal is available. The government announced that they will give food packages to the ordinary poor, but most of these food packages have been given on political affiliation. And besides being given the food packages, they also announced to give 200 RTGS, the Zimbabwean currency, which is about $5 US, and that $5 US is not enough. It can just buy 10 kg of meal and cannot sustain most ordinary families that are now living in poverty. While it has done that, Zimbabwe is a country that has been in crisis for a very long time, for more than 2 decades now, with high unemployment rate, high levels of poverty. With that high unemployment rate, we have seen so many people now engaged in informal sector, selling fruits and vegetables, most of them being vendors or having their small factories so that they can sustain their families. In the middle of this coronavirus, we have seen the ZANU-PF government embarking on a war against the poor, using COVID-19 as a justification for them to pursue their neoliberal policies. They started destroying the vending sites of these informal people, what we call cleanup operation part 2. I think most of you will remember that in 2005, there's a very same government went on attacking the ordinary people in the urban areas, destroying their houses and also their business workplace. Now they've done that again. And this time they were doing it in partnership with the opposition party, the MDC, who control the council, most of the towns, destroying the vending sites as part of trying to push the ordinary poor people back to the rural areas, where most of them will be further subjected to poverty, as the country has witnessed another drought, with most people relying on food handouts from the local and international NGOs. Also, the Judah government, the EG.
No, you have to try and wrap up.
Okay, I'll just do that. Embarked on harassing people. So far, we've had more than 16,000 people who were arrested while it's trying to survive, or while it's trying to go for basic commodities. So there have been really massive attacks on the ordinary people, and we assume that these attacks are going to worsen in the post-COVID. And just this last week into this week, we've seen ZANU-PF fighting with MDC, which will further cause economic crisis, with the finance minister projecting an economic collapse of the country. So our main message from ISO has been that the ordinary people, working people, are the ones who are suffering from this crisis, and they should unite. With the current crisis that have been put on people, the MDC, ZANU-PF, yes, the MDC, we oppose the ZANU-PF government using its dictatorship to suppress the opposition party, but the ordinary people should not be hoodwinked by that. The MDC has been part and parcel of dishing out neoliberal policies that have been attacking the ordinary people. So it's now time for the ordinary people to unite and fight against the worsening of the economic crisis, and also to take ownership of preventing themselves from coronavirus by using the structures that they built, the HIV AIDS structures, the correlate structures that played a key role in mitigating the effects of HIV and also the effects of correlate. So the main message is working class should unite and fight against these enemies that have confronted them. And COVID has showed us that it's possible to live in another way, in another manner, and those who matter for the system have been shown. These are your health workers, your grocery workers. Those are the ones who are important in the system. And the main thing is to unite. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll ask our Kenyan comrades to take 5 minutes each to tell us what their intervention is. Starting with Lena.
Hello.
Hello, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the situation in Kenya, it's very dire. And we are on day 38 of the dawn to dusk curfew, which has been deadlier than the virus itself. So far, the police have killed 16 people, and one of the activists from the social justice movement is missing, together with 3 people. And this, he went missing a week after 2 people also disappeared and were found to have been tortured and killed by the police. There are floods in Kenya. Currently, we are in the season of heavy rains, and the floods here have killed 200 people within a week. People have lost their homes, they've lost their livelihood. In Kariobangi, which is one of the poorer neighborhoods and part of the network of the Social Justice Center, 5,000 families were evicted from their homes by the government just 2 days ago. And there's a very, because of the privatization of water, there's a very acute shortage of water in the slums. And we know that one of the ways to prevent corona is to wash our hands and sanitize our hands, but we don't have water. So I don't know how they're expecting us to do that. And we have the health minister who is more concerned about what people are ordering in hotels with their food, with their alcohol, than the lack of water. There are women who are expectant cannot access prenatal care, they cannot access antenatal care because health workers do not have the protective equipment to care for them and also care for people who have corona, and they're threatening to go on strike because of it. The cases of social and gender-based violence have gone up because now with the layoffs, with the unemployment and everything, we have now men taking out these frustrations, men and women taking out these frustrations on their spouses because of just how this neoliberal and patriarchal economy has disempowered all of us. And the pandemic is very, very dehumanizing for us. We are reaching lows we didn't even know we could reach. There's a woman at the coast who had to boil stones for her children because she didn't have any food. There's a lockdown in one of the estates, Isili, and many of the people, the neighboring neighborhoods of Madare, Korogosho, Kariobangi, most domestic workers go from there to Isili to earn their livelihood, and now they can't do that because Isili is under total lockdown. It's like, and now it's almost like there's a state of emergency because the courts are not working. The police can do whatever they want. If you're caught outside, they assume you have corona, they take you to quarantine, which you have to pay for. And they're extorting bribes from people of such very, very high amounts. And it's like we're just shock after shock after shock after shock. And while you're still reeling from this shock, Nairobi is now militarized because the county government was handed over from the governor to the national government, and there's 8 military officers running Nairobi now. But as this is going on, we are resisting. As the social justice movement, we are resisting, and we are fighting back. Our biggest demand now is the demand for water, a basic right. And as we are resisting, yesterday, some activists were arrested and charged with unlawful gathering and demonstration for going to Nairobi Water Services and asking what is happening with the water situation. So that is a brief update from Kenya. Then Gasheke will continue.
Thank you. Kasheke, can you please pick up?
Hello, everyone. You can hear me, Leo? Leo? Hello?
Hi, please go ahead.
I'm there. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this meeting. This is very important. And also, I really appreciate ROAPE and British Institute for organizing this meeting. So powerful during this crisis. And for sure, the humanity is at crossroad. And it's I didn't see any prophet or anybody predicted about this coronavirus and how it will affect everybody. It's unimaginable that even many big powers of capitalism, they have grounded all their plans. It's unimaginable. But the biggest thing is that it's ordinary people. Ordinary people are the one who are paying heavily. And as you know, if we share a historical perspective of this crisis, is that the economic model that African countries have adopted has made them very, very difficult to survive in this crisis, because as our countries copy what is happening in development world about lockdown. Maybe in Europe, maybe it's possible for people to lock down because there is modern infrastructure. People can access food using Uber, and they can reach where they are. But our African governments have been coping those lockdown, and it's becoming very difficult, a major crisis. Before even this crisis came in, we had a big problem. Our economy was already in a very difficult, chronic unemployment, a huge population of young people, 7% of young people who are Kenyans. The majority of them, they don't have a job. Our economy is an informal economy. So the coronavirus crisis found us when we had already a huge problem of an economy that was not providing job for the people. People are still struggling, and a majority are doing informal economy and peasant. So when a coronavirus was reported first in Kenya in March 2013, that's when people realized that at the end of the day, this issue was going to catch up with us. And it found our government that was not prepared at all. After all, it had allowed a Chinese plane to land in Kenya with 332 passengers during the epic of coronavirus in China, Wuhan. The plane, Chinese airline, landed here in February 2024. So this showed that our government and the whole they were not prepared. The same thing, the infrastructure, historical perspective, since the IMF and the World Bank imposed the cost sharing and imposed the privatization of basic services like healthcare and education. It found already the healthcare system was already in ICU. So this crisis is huge. As my colleague Lena, she has said that we are facing a major crisis, especially in informal settlement. In Nairobi, majority of the people live in informal settlement. In Shakdwela, like South Africa or Nigeria, where our colleague was talking about the challenges people are facing. So we are facing a major problem at the moment. Already people have broken the curfew. They are going back to the city. People are told to stay at home, to work at home. We have a president who is disconnected with the people. First of all, he told people they can stay at home, work at home, and also use Google. He had a partnership with Google Loan, saying that they can provide people to work as people. A president who is very disconnected with the people, because he didn't know that majority of his people that he was speaking to, they are in informal settlement. Juakali, people who do mamambogas that sell things in the streets, hawkers. So all these people are doing informal economy. There's no way they can stay at home. So after 2 weeks, people realized that they were starving. So they started going back to the city. So from yesterday, the capital city was full with the people. And even the Minister of Health was saying that people are going back to normalize the situation before even they could flatten the curve. The challenge is that the government of Kenya is talking about flattening the curve, but they're not providing people with the basics. That's water, foods, an issue that they can allow people to stay at home. And it's very difficult also to stay at home, especially when a majority of the people, they don't have home, it's just shacks. That's the biggest problem. You can't be able to tell people to stay, even it is possible. I can't imagine that if people are saying that you can be able to do disinfection by spraying everywhere. The sewage system has collapsed. There's no water. So even saying that you are going to clean those spaces is very difficult, because it's not possible. So these methods of coping solution for developed ones, it's not possible applicable, especially in Nairobi. Already people are breaking up the curfew, and that's why the government has no solution for the problem of the people, especially healthcare, education. What they are doing, they're using police. The only thing they have is the instrument of violence that is being used to lock people, and that's why there is highest number of extrajudicial killing, torture, and disappearance. So we have enforced disappearance that is happening during this time. So it is a way of instilling fear to the people, because there is no way they can be able to contain the people in an informal settlement without providing them with basics. So what they are using is a state violence. And historically, you know, in Africa and especially in Kenya, we still have a colonial state, a government instrument that is very violent, and even in the East African region, whether in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Kenya, in Uganda, we still have these instruments.
Okay, if you can just please wrap up so that we can open it up for others, because our time is pretty far gone.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that this crisis has exposed our political leadership and our political economic model that we were imposed by World Bank and IMF. And the same thing at the moment, the government are borrowing a lot of money. Just yesterday, IMF gave Kenya 78 billion to help to subsidize the budget. And that tells you that IMF and the World Bank, they're using this crisis also to put us in a lot of debt, that also will put millions of people in poverty. So what I was saying is that we have not lost hope as social justice movement. We are organizing, and we have across the country social justice centers that are organizing against these crises. We have not slept through the crisis. We are documenting issues of human rights violation. And that's why I say it's very important we share experience from Zimbabwe, Ghana, so that we can share experience and solidarity, because this is an invitation for us to rethink about writing the rules of this global economy that has left millions of people in poverty and has continued dehumanizing people. I think this coronavirus is a wake-up call to say to the world that it is a time to work together and create an alternative model of economy that can be able to provide people with the basic needs. And it tells us that as ordinary people, as a poor people, as a working class, we are just alone, because the big power will build up the banks, will build up the big company, and will leave the ordinary poor people and ordinary workers to pay for the crisis. That's what I can say, and I really appreciate for this link up.
Yeah, thank you, Kasheke. And thanks to all our speakers. We'll open it up now for interventions. I mean, people can use the group, the participants thing to show hands, or they can also put their questions in the chat. We don't have a lot of time, so I won't try to do any wrap up at this point, but I will just open it up and hear interventions. Because people have been putting comments in the site, which I'm sure we can all read, so there's no need to go to those. But any interventions, questions that people want to come in, let's see the hands and also maybe the things in the side of the chat. Charles, what do we have? Okay, Leo. Please go ahead.
The top. Spot the top. Oh, the chat. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a Pove, Kwekudazi. So Pove, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, sorry.
Very much. Thank you very much. I just wanted to take up the points made by Femi and Heike about essentially the concentration camps where people who are being tested positive for the virus are held in quarantine. I just wondered whether this is happening in many other countries. Thank you.
So this is a question, an open question. I guess let's take the other interventions, and maybe somebody can pick up that a response to that question as we go along. Okay, I think the next person we have is Kwekudazi, and then Carl. Kweku, you have the floor.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yes, I'm most particularly interested in the resistance aspect. We are in a lockdown condition. In some countries, there is a minimum or maximum level of restriction to movement, ban on public gatherings and everything. In Kenya, as one of the speakers said, people go to the water supply company and they are arrested when they want to find out why water is not flowing. We are having similar situation in Ghana here, where even though water is free, there are places where there are no pipes to connect water to households. So people are complaining about how they can access the free water supply. These are the challenges, and these, because of the increasing hardship that we're experiencing, people want to express their anger. People want to make demands, yet they cannot gather, they cannot meet in public and everything. What are some of the mechanisms that we can adopt within this period as a form of resistance that can help us enhance our aggression against the ruling class? Thank you very much.
Carl.
Right, so I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I've been part of the C19 People's Coalition. And I wanted to just point out to a couple of things. The one is the modes of resistance. So of course there's online stuff, but more importantly, there's real stuff. So we've had demonstrations where people observe social distancing, stand 1 meter or 2 meters apart with placards, singing, dancing, speaking to the press. The one in particular was around the conditions for health workers with no personal protective equipment. There have also been cases, my colleague Heike Becker talked about the quarantine of home Fontaine near Cape Town. I did want to just draw attention to one thing, which is the way the coalition managed to that point towards an economy, a different kind of organization of life. Sorry about that. I'm back if I'm still on the floor.
Sorry, I think this got a bit messed up. I think Carl was speaking. After Carl, then Archie, you can have the floor. Unless.
Right.
Okay, Carl, are you done? If you are not, okay, please be quick.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, now I'm back. There's just the final point I want to make is On the one hand, food parcels, which are an immediate relief measure, but on the other, trying to put together new local production and link that to communities that need better food distribution and production networks, pointing towards a future in which we free of the big supermarkets. That's the point I wanted to make.
Okay, thanks. Archie, please.
Thanks.
Archie, please, you have the floor.
Right. My question is regarding the impact of the COVID virus. If we stop for a moment looking at it as a disease and then look at it as
Sorry, but our links have kind of dropped a bit, so people can just type their questions. It's become
Are we allowed to talk?
there's a problem with the connection.
All right.
So maybe if we, those of us who are not speaking, perhaps we would improve the thing by maybe switching off our videos or something, improve the quality of the audio.
Right. Okay. All right.
Maybe it would be a good chance if people can hear me now. We can look at winding things up.
Yeah, there are a number of things which I think just very quickly to draw some of them. There are a number of things really which connect the African thing to the global. A number of countries are taking loans. The African thing, policies that favor the, you know, the policies that favor the, you know, the elite, and questions too of of just the user global thing. There's a number of very. I think there are some common elements of our public goods, including, in this case, really students and access to has come to the fore as a key issue. In addition to the issues about water, sanitation, what I call the classic public goods, and so on, living conditions. So if speakers can just very quickly kind of pick up some of those issues, particularly also take on board the comments that some people have thrown in. Maybe we can start with the thing about the concentration camp question. Pick up that particular question. Either of you can do that.
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I think that's very fundamental healthcare. You have to come out and protest. But I think what we need to learn is that one way of from a colleague from Nigeria, this like this way with Zoom, also sharing leaflets is a very critical aspect. But at the end of the day, this social crisis whole question of social, they can bring an alternative economic model that can around social justice centers. Doing a self-help activity, in is in small that can be
chest point. Sorry, comrade, if I mispronounce your name. I think it's a particularly valid one, because we have a situation where, I heard a couple of the comments, two things that I thought are worth responding to. First was the idea that about resistance, and I agree that resistance is absolutely important in the particular specific conditions that are in the particular specific brought about as a result of COVID-19. Nonetheless, as we know, it is an emergency response that points about the way in which about and for the IMF, the primary issue, the most important, whether it's PPEs or whatever it is, the most important thing is that you do not lose your access to global financial markets. So you ought to be a good debt repayer or join a responsible limited debt settlement, and you ought to spend your you ought to make sure that you do not use public expenditure to do anything. It's whatever it has done, whether to medical and health personnel, on payments to in whatever you do. The Ghana health personnel were called first loss instruments by people like Amazon, and so the whole economy is structured that way. Even on a PPP model, what will happen to the private sector? Those circumstances, when the second claim I had, as a more caring society, or that there's something almost automatic because the ruling class has left, I doubt it very much. On the contrary, what is to make up for the expenditures that have taken place, for the degrowth that is taking place, the recession, and so on and so forth. So strife doesn't necessarily mean a greater united response by working people, when those working people themselves, even under the COVID conditions, are being fragmented. If you look at the formal trade unions, for example, they were not always on the same page as slum dwellers when it comes to when to impose law. That the informal sector is quite clearly that the informal sector is looking for a job, and whether it is actually a permanent way in which, let's say, if you take the services industry, people salary, who have no social insurance, no, they are, what that's what all reserve armies of labor do. But I'm what is happening. Internationalism, Pan-Africanism, and even nationwide agendas last to get PPEs. They are the ones facing the double
Tafazwa. Okay, do you want to take the floor? Have some of our speakers.
Sorry. A couple of comments was I saw that on the notes by Kaufenhold about connection indeed between the mutual aid and the more anti-systemic systemic politics of movements that have been happening in South Africa. And I just can support that, and I could give example to someone forgot discussion where the it's for instance, being charged by something where, like to say, in the basic expense as well.
Okay, I think we have run out of time. As a, shall we say, a first intervention by ROAPE, as ROAPE. This the discussions here will be reproducing some form on the some
this whole
so well, it has gone very well. From the continent. In fact, I'm hoping post-corona, we are going to have post will have learned we have the next series of these meetings. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much to our friend
Thank you. Bye.